all, welcome to everybody that's joined so far. Thanks for joining today. For those I haven't met, my name's Ian Mammon-Gay. I'm the programming chair for our Greater Kansas City HIMSS chapter. Myself and a few other board members are on the line today, including Brandy Myers. She'll help with the Zoom webinar today. But if you're interested and want to get more involved with our local chapter, please reach out to any of us. We'd love to have you get more involved. And you want to present any topics in the future, also please reach out on that as well. Before we get started, I wanted to do a quick plug for our sponsors, Nordic Consulting and Pure Storage. They're our ambassador sponsors. And then we also have two executive sponsors, Healthcare IT Leaders and 314E. So thank you to those groups, not just for this webinar, but for your help throughout the entire year and all our events. Quick plug for some upcoming events. We've got quite a few coming up here. We've got 3 in-person events. Maybe mark your calendars for January 30th, March 5th, and May 9th for our upcoming in-person events. The one on January 30th is at 8:30 in the morning, so I did want to call that out so you could put that on the calendar now. It's about 3 hours. It's our annual State of Healthcare. It's very similar to what we've done in the past if you've joined that as well. We're lucky to have several local leaders joining us that day, as well as a virtual message from the HIMSS CEO, Hal Wolf, as well. We also have several virtual lunch and learns coming up as well, which you can see on the screen as well. But hope to see you at some of these events coming up. With that said, I'm excited about today's webinar around holiday burnout or burnout in general. We're lucky to have Dr. Larry Long with us on the line. So you can see Dr. Long's brief bio here. He's a PhD in counseling psychology, a licensed and practicing psychologist still. He also serves as the director at the Professional Wellbeing Center at the University of Kansas Medical Center. In addition to that, he's also the director of counseling and education support services at KUMC and also the assistant vice chancellor as well. So got a ton of research on this topic, and we're lucky to have him today. So excited to turn it over to you, Dr. Long. Thanks again for joining today.
You are welcome. Let me start my share here. Okay. So my name's Larry Long. My pronouns are he, him. I've been a psychologist and working in various settings since 1997 and since 2001 at KU Med on the university side, where I oversee the services that we care for our 3,200 students and residents. And also currently I have overseen and coordinate services that we provide for physicians and APPs in our professional wellbeing center. We've got about 2,000 individuals that come and seek us out. And so today I'm excited about talking to you about this. I talk to people quite a bit. I do lots of presentations on the topic of burnout mitigation, and how you do that. But I was asked to sort of theme it a little bit and to talk about kicking out the Grinch. And I don't know, I'm not as much a person who's into stories, but this one really kind of caught me and got me excited. And I love this picture of the Grinch who looks kind of ominous with his eyes and eyebrows and all that. But when we think about kicking out the Grinch, the first thing is we got to ask ourselves, who is this Grinch character and why should he be kicked out? So I was wondering that, and so I didn't have to do a lot of research. I asked ChatGPT that, and I said, okay, well, who's this Grinch and why should he be kicked out? Well, he's grumpy. He's cynical. He's kind of antisocial and sarcastic and witty and has a sharp, sardonic tone, mischievous and plotting and lonely. And he's not the kind of person that you probably want to have on your team. You probably don't want to be called a Grinch, I would guess. And I don't want to discriminate against him, because he might have microcardia, which is the heart being 2 sizes too small. The good news is, to some extent, his heart grew 3 times larger by the end of the story, but that's also a terrible health condition. So I just thought I'd call that out. But the gist of it is, this Grinch character, I just don't know that we want to be that person or we want to carry that person into our team. It's interesting because I thought about Grinchy people, and then it made me think of the clinical work that I do and the organizational consulting work that I do with different teams. And He reminded me of these two expressions we often see before people quit their jobs or before people decide to get divorced. One is carrying some degree of resentment, and the other is contempt. And resentment comes first. So if you're Grinchy or Grinch-like, one of the dilemmas is if you're at work or you're in a relationship, sometimes you feel some bitterness or indignation because of a perceived injustice or mistreatment. You don't feel like the other person, if you're in a relationship, is being a good friend with you. Also, your work doesn't feel like it's honoring you, and there's some unfairness. It's rooted in this sense of unfairness and frustration when people carry some degree of resentment. An example would be that you feel like somebody else is taking credit for your work. The boss takes credit for your work or something, and you are sort of less acknowledged. More worse, and often a part of when people get divorced or leave their jobs is the sense of contempt. Contempt involves some mental distancing, and it's feeling like, hey, I don't deserve this and I could do better. You might hear somebody say that, but it's often carries a degree of sense superiority or dismissiveness, judgment aimed at another person, a group, or whatever. And so when I think of people who get too Grinch-like behavior or people who are really burned out and upset, they might feel some resentment, as the Grinch did with Christmas, and then also some degree of contempt. Oh, let me make it worse. So it's one thing if we're grumpy and crunchy or whatever, but with burnout, but like if you have staff members that are burned out, it can really threaten the psychological safety of your team. So just to cover the bases, if you're not familiar with the construct of psychological safety is this construct where it's this belief that we have that if we bring stuff up, we won't be punished or humiliated, that we can say what we really think and feel and contribute to the team, and that the team has enough trust with each other to sort of take it. If you're constantly complaining or you're building resentment or even some degree of contempt, that can be sabotaging to psychological safety, as you might guess. The research shows consistently. Google did a study in 2017 that looked at high performing groups and measured their psychological safety. And what their research showed is that mutual respect made it possible for all to contribute. And those diverse ideas led to higher performance and a greater degree of people staying with the community, reporting a sense of belonging, and decreased attrition. There was a study looking in 2018 at over 380,000 folks that worked in hospitals across 630 hospitals. And those individuals, 68% of them indicated that they were afraid to bring up a question and to say something if they saw something that wasn't right. A Gallup poll also indicated 3 in 10 workers strongly agree that their opinions at work count, which suggests 7 of 10 do not. If you want to dig into this, you could research and look even in greater depth at Dr. Edmondson's work at Harvard. And she's got a great YouTube video that kind of talks about psychological safety in healthcare, how it affects teams, and its impact. And I'd encourage you to dig in deeper if this concept calls to you. I want to be clear, though, psychological safety isn't being nice. It's not necessarily communicating indirectly. It's not guaranteeing that everybody's ideas will be applauded. It's not job security. It's not freedom from conflict or debate. In fact, it's okay to debate because we have trust here. We perceive that we're on the same page, on the same team. It's not permission to underperform. It's not low comfort zone or low ambition. But what we know is when groups do have a higher degree of psychological safety, and let me trace this back. Why am I talking about this? When people are grinchy, and maybe that's because of burnout related stuff, maybe it's because of other reasons, it adversely impacts psychological safety. But when teams have strong psychological safety, you get better engagement, better retention, decreased burnout, better staff satisfaction, better patient safety, improved productivity, innovation, greater group effectiveness. So, okay, so what do you do if I'm a manager or leading a group And what we do when we coach leaders is we want groups to explicitly talk about comfort in bringing up challenging topics or using the term psychological safety, and what can we do to improve it, and what are some of our barriers or threats that limit it. If I'm a leader, I want to demonstrate vulnerability. So I might acknowledge a mistake or a setback, or I might be humble. I might not be shaming of the person. If I'm upset about a mistake that was made, I may address the mistake without, doing it in a public way. Um, I One thing that's really key and important to know is that if you want to build greater closeness in friendships, if you want to build greater psychological safety, it doesn't happen because you go on a retreat. It doesn't happen at date nights. It happens in small moments. Trust is built in small moments over time. And it's really key, I think, to think of if I'm going to build greater safety within my team, it's going to have to happen through repeated encounters, low time, high impact encounters with varying people. One thing that we often encourage folks to do, especially in healthcare settings, a lot of times we get hyper focused on what's not right and mistakes and challenges, and that's where our bandwidth goes. But we often overlook and don't deliberately acknowledge when people do things right or do that in sincere ways and specific ways. But if you were to ask me, what's one way people can build psychological safety with a team, I'd say make sure that you're saying thank you, and not just once, recurrently, and have it be built into your cadence and your meetings, and have it be a part of the structure. Don't let it become a ritual. It's got to be specific, it's got to be sincere, but I think it's important. When it occurs, we coach leaders when they witness behaviors that demonstrate someone's humbleness and taking ownership and demonstrating good psychological safety. You want to reinforce it. You want to be able to share positive examples. We need to be able to have tension within a team, to have disagreements, and to say this is about the work. And also, we want to make sure that people sort of get the message that we're all sort of struggling in terms of being imperfect humans and in imperfect systems. But it's this idea that we want to make sure there's space for people to say what they really think. Okay, so if I stepped away from psychological safety or burned out or Grinch or whatever, this time of year can be just hard. And by that I mean there's a lot of research. In 2023, the APA did a study looking at the impact of the holidays on stress, and 89% indicated that there was a degree of stress as it might relate to not having enough money, or missing someone who you love, or anticipating a family conflict, or witnessing a family conflict. 49% indicated their stress level during between November and January as moderate. 43% indicated that the stress interferes with them enjoying the holidays. 41% indicated that the stress at this time of the year is higher. It increases from other times of the year. And over a third indicated that sometimes the holidays feel like a competition. It's interesting. In our culture, we'll say to people, "Hey, how you doing?" And sometimes that means hello. And then there's like, "How you doing? No, really, how are you?" And in a similar way, we do that with, "Hey, how was your holidays?" You ever ask that to a colleague or a staff member or somebody, and then they say, "Oh, they were okay. How are yours?" And that's the hello conversation. And then you've had other instances, and if you are a person who messages that you're approachable, and you built some degree of psychological safety and trust with that person group, and you say, "Hey, how was your holidays?" And someone says, "Oh, they were okay. It was really hard. I miss my mom, or I miss my dad, or it got tough." And now all of a sudden you're hearing a lot more than, because you thought you were saying hello, but they took you seriously. I was talking to a group earlier this week, and they shared that this was a dilemma that they had. They were surprised the person took them seriously, and clearly that meant they trust, but they weren't quite ready for the whole story. The other thing we have is, and you may have some of this, or some of you may have some of the winter blues. There is this thing called seasonal affective disorder. It impacts people in differential ways, but you can see whether it's clinical or subclinical, there's a percentage of the population when there's low sunlight that does have an impact on mood. And then let's make it worse. We magnify it because if my mood is kind of lousy, I eat more, I exercise less, and I do things that maybe aren't as helpful for my wellness or well-being. And so this is another thing. So just to kind of paint a context, when we talk about burnout or we talk about Grinchy-like behavior, even resentment and contempt, these aren't personality attributes. The idea is there are probably good reasons why people feel how they feel. And it could be that, they have seasonal affective disorder. It could be that it's the holidays. It could be there's a historical context related or something going on you have no idea about. Now, at the same time, the other thing that holidays bring out in us is sometimes people are really positive. And, it's tough because if you're going through something during the holidays and you're feeling some kind of way about it, having to put on a face and perform for others is positive. But there's also this thing called toxic positivity. And if any, I asked ChatGPT, which character in the world seems to represent toxic positivity? And what it said was SpongeBob. Apparently, SpongeBob doesn't have much tolerance for people sharing their feelings, especially about heavy things. Always seems to kind of run over you. I don't know. I can't recall SpongeBob a whole lot, but what toxic positivity is this, it's not that there's a problem with being positive. It's a problem with that it has to be positive. It's sort of an excessive overgeneralization of positive thinking where it feels invalidating to authentic feelings. And generally, positivity is a beneficial thing, but toxic positivity imposes this idea that people should always look on the bright side and suppress any negative feelings, regardless of the circumstances. I was talking to a group of cancer center providers last week about this, and one of them said, "Oh my gosh, if I hear some family member say again that there's probably a bigger picture purpose in the reason why you have cancer and that you're going to become all the better for it, I'm going to yell. I'm going to scream." And it's because cancer is a terrible thing. And I don't know that there is a bigger picture purpose. And that's what sometimes people will say and do because they feel uncomfortable sitting with the ugh that is having had a cancer diagnosis. It's a terrible thing. So characteristics of toxic positivity, how do I know that I'm actually being toxically positive? I really like this emotional support dumpster fire character. I actually ordered a few of these because I thought they would be a good thing to have, right? But characteristics of toxic positivity would be like diminishing a response, like you just be happy. It could be worse. Without acknowledging that someone is upset, or implying that feelings of sadness or frustration are a sign of weakness or failure. Oversimplifying complicated emotions, things like everything happens for a reason, or forcing a positive outlook, like stay positive in the situation where sadness and grief would entail. A year and a half ago, sadly, I had an uncle who died, and I remember going to the Celebration of Life event, and people were talking about him. And I had this other uncle, his brother, who was getting really disappointed and frustrated that people around him were looking sad when it was supposed to be a celebration of life. And he came to me and said, "Hey, Larry, no, you're supposed to be positive and happy, and it's a celebration of life. It's don't be sad." And I didn't confront him or get into it, but I said, "I guess that's what you think." And the thought I had is that he must be really either in a lot of pain or hard to sit with the sadness that he's witnessing around, that he requires others around him to be so positive. So examples would be like after a breakup, you just have to get over it. You'll feel better, or they're in a better place now, or you should be grateful. Again, it's not a problem to be positive. The problem is when you don't acknowledge the other feelings, where it invalidates a person's feelings, creates a sense of shame, hinders growth, fosters suppression of feelings. So the notion would be something about, you go into a setting and someone says, "Hey, how's your holidays?" It's important to know that they might have been heavy. They might have been good, but they might have been heavy. And both are true. And it depends on what space you would want to open up for them and, your comfort with that disclosure. So if you were to ask me, what are some alternatives then? I want to be positive, but I don't want to be toxically positive. Well, I would encourage you to validate the feelings like, oof, that sounds really hard. Or I get, sometimes the holidays aren't happy, or they can be both. They can be happy and sad. Or how can I help you through this? It's this notion to say, as humans, we have positive and negative feelings, and sometimes we're impacted and sort of, hit square between the eyes with lots of different things. And the idea that I have to present a front, I mean, you already have to step up at work and put on your professional face, put on your game face, do your best and all that. But I think if you have colleagues, if you have teammates, team members, family, friends, those kinds of things, I would wish you would have space and give space to feel like you have opportunities for authenticity and connectedness in meaningful and sincere ways. Because the holidays may not always be happy for everybody, but certainly they can be meaningful. And I think that's a takeaway from this section I hope you'll have. I want to pause here, though, for just a moment and say, I'm curious for those who are on the call, of what I said, is there one question that you might have? Or if not a question, is there one statement that you'd like to make that you could put in in the questions? Let me see if I can get to the questions section so I can see it. Here it is. So if I'm going to pause for just a minute, I would ask you to put in the question field either one question or one statement that you might like to make about of what I said, what you connected with, and then you won't see these questions open, but you'll hear me. I'll restate those and either answer the question or make an acknowledgement of whatever the statement was. And I'm sorry, I'm a psychologist, right? So we can sit in quiet for a little while, and I know that's can be uncomfortable, but thank you. So I have one from Jeremiah. I think the part I got the most out about was the toxic positivity. My mother exemplifies this. It's quite frustrating to all of her kids. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate um your making that statement. I think that sounds like that's something you were able to connect with. Sometimes being able to give it a frame and so to have something to call it, I don't mean toxic positivity like I'm going to go punish you and say, hey, you're committing toxic positivity. But I want to be able to know that, like, if I feel weird, that I'm not also being positive or I'm not sort of meeting your expectations because other more sincere stuff makes you uncomfortable. I don't want to feel weird about it. I don't want to feel shameful about it. Okay, there may be other thoughts or questions that you have, but I want to keep moving because I have a lot of content to get through and I want to make sure I honor that. So if you do have another question or another thought, feel free to put it in the question and answer period. Thank you, Jeremiah. I appreciate your comment, but I'm going to keep going. So let's talk about you for just a minute. Not you, but like you and your brethren and others. And I have the privilege and the honor of working with really accomplished humans who are smart and they are humans. They're flawed humans in a flawed system. And things I might hear them say are things like, I just got to get through this week. Or I think I'll sleep in February. Or I don't have time to eat mindfully or for my friends or to exercise or I don't have time for hobbies, or I just don't seem to be doing anything well, or I'm my own worst critic. Have you said those things sometime over the last month or so? If you have, that's not unique to you. I'll tell you because I've heard these things from some really bright, accomplished humans. And one of the things that I so appreciate about the folks I get to work with every day and the doctors and nurse practitioners and even our medical students and residents is they have this really amazing ability to perform in a consistent way while concurrently managing and enduring a high degree of suffering. That's a good thing and a problem, right? I mean, I like resiliency. I want to be resilient. At the same time, this idea of not feeling the pain and the distress, it accumulates, it becomes problematic. And I so want you to step up for your team and step up for your performance and honor your values and the commitments you made. At the same time, I also would wish for you to like have friends and like enjoy your life and be happy and those kinds of things. And the challenge is sometimes it feels like I can either be successful professionally or successful in this one other way, or I can be happy, but I can't be both. And I would argue that the truth is to win, you have to be both. It's essential. And it's not that one is important and none are the others aren't, it's all important. When we talk about burnout, though, just so that I have a clearer reference point, because I've referenced this a number of times, and burnout, I think in our popular culture has a lot of meanings, but specifically what I'm talking about is feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distancing from your job, feeling of negativism or cynicism, and related to your job, and reduced professional efficiency. If you're feeling these things and it's not just about your job, it's about every aspect of your life, that might be depression or that might be anxiety or something like this. But if it seems to be centrally related to your job, we would imagine this as burnout as it relates to burnout with your job. And let's be clear that a lot of times we blame the victim, I guess, in terms of professional success and burnout, where it's somehow the person's fault. But a lot of times what I find is that, especially with successful professionals, it's really system related injuries and value related injuries. By value injuries, often you'll hear this term in the literature for physicians called moral injury. But I think in day to day life, we have these challenging situations where I have a value that I want to honor my boss. And also, I want to progress professionally, successfully. And I want my team to succeed. And we have limited resources and limited time to do the stuff we want to do. And also, I care about my partner or my spouse, and I want to honor that identity and role. And as a father or a parent, I want to honor that. Or as a family member, brother or sister, I want to honor that. And I also want to honor my health. And sometimes these priorities are in conflict, and it's not possible to do one without harming the other. And so I guess back to that statement, like is it's all important. Like not any of these is not important. But I think one of the dilemmas is sometimes it's the system that we're in, sometimes it's the circumstance that we're in. But if you're like most humans or like me, you're going to have dilemmas with value injuries or value conflicts where you're having, mixed priorities pulling you 12 different ways. And one of the hardest things is identifying what is this value here? What am I butting up against? Or what other values are in play that seems to be so upsetting that I'm not able to honor either myself, my health, my work, my kids, or whatever. Um, these are key contributors to burnout. It's less so about a person's aptitude to be resilient, and I think it's more about these sort of values injuries that end up people end up having. Okay, so let me get down to it though, because I want to give you some key takeaways and things that you can actually do and walk away with that would be useful. Well, what you're not going to hear me say is that stress is a bad thing, because we all need a degree of stress. This is the Yerkes-Dodson effect that was developed in the early 1900s that shows as your stress level increases, your performance increases. But that's not what we call stress. Typically, what we call stress is the stuff on the far right. Um, and it's this sweet spot we get to with our stress level that lets us be at our best on our A game. The problem is a lot of us have to do it when we're not feeling it. It's like I mentioned with the doctors that a lot of them have to step up and honor their role and identity when they're fatigued or when they're not doing well, or they just came out of a room with some other bad thing that happened or some other event that occurred. But when you chronically blow by your stress warning signals, it's a problem. And so the idea is like this. Imagine this. So if you were an athlete that had a really high pain threshold, like it took a lot for you to feel the pain, what's the problem? Well, the problem is by the time you know you're injured, you're really injured, and the recovery time is so much more. Okay, let me change the setting. So imagine that you're a person who engages in romantic relationships where you can really put up with a lot of drama. I mean, you can take a lot. By the time you realize that you're in deep, you're on your way for divorce. You're emotionally detached. You're feeling resentful. You're feeling some contempt. You've blown by those stress warning signals. One of the challenges, like I don't want you to feel it every time you're stressed, but one of the challenges is the settings that we're in, the work settings, the other settings that we're in. We do it when we're not feeling it, but we don't have an awareness that I'm hurting. This isn't going well, and the stress. And so we've got to have an attunement or an awareness, a better barometer of enough already. Because if we don't, if you chronically blow by your stress warning signals, one of the challenges is that by the time you get injured, you're going to be really injured and you're going to be really burned out. And that's when people leave jobs and change professions and those kinds of things. Now, if you're like a lot of high performers, one of the dilemmas is that you don't always wear it on your sleeve. You've got to be consistent with what you do. And so what do we look for when we look for suffering with people who are high performers? There's some decline in their performance. They're showing up late, they're calling in sick. There's a level of humor within the work culture that you're in, but it goes a little bit darker. Or there's a change in demeanor or appearance, or people are extra grumpy and they're speaking out, or they're using a dominant voice tone or making, some sort of, using stronger language or stronger energy. These are red flags where you could say, if you're witnessing this, well, that person's just a jerk. And that could be true, and I don't want to diminish that. But at the same time, if you'd ask a psychologist, what he would say is that's probably more likely a sign of suffering. It doesn't mean that a person is entitled to express it that way or feel that way. But I think it's important to recognize suffering along the way. It makes it easier for me to intervene or address it if I think that someone's suffering versus if someone's being a jerk. So let me tell you, I'm going to give you sort of a gist of this of like what do we know from our busy medical residents. What we do is we have people come in for anywhere between like 3 and 6 years after they go through medical school, and they work 80 plus hours a week. Every week, and they go consistently. And so these are some really stressed out, tired people. And every year we level up what we expect of them. It gets harder and harder and harder. But what our research has shown, Dr. Norval leads us with a study looking at what is impactful with residents' help, is when our residents prioritize their sleep and are able to, and report sleeping 7 or more hours a night, they report statistically significantly lower burnout. Sleep is really important with our burnout levels. When they are able to exercise one time a week, that's not three, that's not five. One time a week, they report, they indicate statistically significantly lower burnout levels. When they indicate that they have a regular spiritual practice, not defined, but just a regular spiritual practice, they report lower burnout scores. When they engage in hobbies outside of work, when they protect time for those hobbies and protect time with their family and friends, when they regularly do self-assessments about their well-being, and make adjustments, they report statistically significantly lower burnout scores. Concerning the teams that they live in, when they report having a higher sense of teamwork, feeling supported by their peers, feeling like their program is a supportive culture with their own personal wellness, they report statistically significantly lower burnout scores. So we know that you intentionally and deliberately, um, protecting time for exercise, eating in a mindful way, sleeping and prioritizing sleep as something important for your health and well-being, looking for opportunities to connect and to communicate, meditating, spiritual practice, all those things. We know that those are high impact self-care strategies. I'm going to talk in greater depth about gratitude practices, uh, positive growth mindsets and self-compassion here in just a minute. Um, but I'm going to note one more thing, and then I'm going to pause again and ask you what's one question you might have or one takeaway that you've had from what I've said thus far. I'll do that in a minute. But one of the problems that high achievers have is they over-engineer their response. It's sort of like the example is like New Year's Day resolutions. Like, how many of you have had those? If you're like most people, we all have those, or we have this is, a point for which I'm going to eat more healthfully and I'm going to spend more time with my kids and spouse, or I'm going to exercise with whatever consistency. If you're a high achiever and you're a go big or go home person, one of the risks you run is you're going to have a template or a model in your head of what it is to be good at eating consistently and mindfully, or what it is to be good at exercising. And so if it's you're exercising, you might say, well, I got to go 3 times a week and for an hour each time, half an hour cardio, half an hour of weights, and I got to do that consistently. And a lot of people do that in January. And then life bites them, or travel bites them, or holidays, or something else, and things get off track. And two mistakes have happened. One is that they're doing too much too soon and it's not sustainable. And the second thing is they're not planning for getting off track. So if you're to ask me, what are like two things I can do as I approach the after holiday time, if I have these personal goals to not get burned out and be less stressed out, I would tell you it's going to be really important to scale up to set a goal that's you're ridiculously confident that you'll achieve it, and like 80% confident you're going to achieve it, and to be able to do that in a consistent way, and then to add more on. Now, what it can feel like is like you're bailing a ship out with a teacup, right? So like if I am telling you okay, then maybe rather than exercising 3 times a week for an hour, what you really should do is go walk twice for 15 minutes. And it can feel like, well, what's that going to do? But walking for 15 minutes can turn into 20. It can turn into 30. You build a habit, but being able to build a habit means you do it again and again. You should plan on getting off track. Everybody gets off track. The question is, what are you going to do to get back on track? And what we don't want to do is to wait until you're like sick and tired and frustrated and whatever. We want you to get on track much more efficiently and proficiently because you planned for it. And planning for it might mean I can't start back up exercising where I was before. I need to have a step in the right direction. I need to sort of backtrack and start up slowly. Or eating more mindfully might be, I'm going to try to eat out 2 times less this week. I'm going to try to cook for myself 1 or 2 times less, or 1 or 2 times more. Okay, of what I've said, I'm curious. I'm going to pause here and I've got my third part here that I'll do in a minute. But of what I've said, I'm curious, is there one thing that I said that you connected with that you might be able to acknowledge in the questions? Or is there one question that you might have? Thank you, Rachel. Rachel indicated, love to hear that small changes like exercising one time a week and getting 7 hours of sleep can help us lower our burnout rates. You don't have to work out every day or get 9 hours of sleep to potentially burn out risk. And I like the mindset that starting small gives yourself success. Great. I so appreciate that. It's so interesting because what I find is that with high achievers, um, if you are able to make a change that's really a 5% difference or a 10% difference, like I think the mistake we make is a lot of us want to revolutionize our life, but these small changes really can accumulate. Thank you, Matt. Matt said, I've had some research that music addresses self-care and can improve mood. Could that be considered meditation? Absolutely. I think about like anything that you can get into that will be an immersion. Well, you'll have a like an immersed experience with it, gives you a break, use a different part of your brain. I think that's awesome. Trang said, starting small really has worked for me. Starting with 5 push-ups is really been able to help me get sort of uh, and was able to reach that every day. No, I think that's beautiful. I love it, Trang, because the idea of you being able to set a goal and achieve it is much more likely to reinforce. But if I wanted to set someone up for non-achievement, I would say set an ambitious goal, hold on for a while, but then not achieve it, and then do that again and again. That's just discouragement, but that's what we end up doing. Not intentionally. I think we're well intended in that instance, but that's what happens. Well, thank you all for that feedback. I'm going to keep going. I've got more takeaways and things to consider. A lot of times we talk to people as they try to navigate burnout and stress about deliberate, intentional compartmentalization. And a lot of us try to distract ourselves, and you play on your phone or you do other kinds of things to just not think about stuff. But the idea of intentional compartmentalization would be where, night before you go to worries, if I wake up in the middle of the night worrying, I want to do some intentional worrying time. So before I go to bed, I want to spend 30 minutes writing down everything I'm worried about. And I'm going to tell myself as I put it away that these things are important, just not at this time. I'm going to put this away. I'll get to it tomorrow. So it's sort of like giving yourself a chance to have a focus time if the worry is coming through. But also, I think it's this idea of being able to focus on what you have control over, acknowledge in your reflection that time, and be able to sort of acknowledge that, you have a certain amount of power and influence in the world, and focus things you don't isn't going to serve you. The research shows, though, that gratitude, Harvard's done a lot of research on gratitude, and sending a note to someone has an impact on a person's psychological health or well-being. There's research that looks at three good things where I've had folks that I've worked with on their way home or on their way to work, or even as a part of connecting with their kids or their spouse. You go home and you talk to your spouse, you vent and you share the things that didn't go right. But being able to share three good things, three positive things that went right, the research shows that that's been psychologically helpful and healthful. Being able to ask yourself with gratefulness what you received today, what you gave, and what you could do more, the research has shown that that's helpful. Positive reminiscing, thinking about or imagining an experience that you've had 10 minutes twice a day where things went well, has been shown to have an impact on people's positive outlooks. Being able to reflect on past kindnesses, things that you've done, you think we're in the holiday season, there's lots of opportunities for this. Being able to think about an achievement that you made, something that you did that you're proud of or that you feel good about, and what that says about you, I think is helpful. And finally, what went well? The what went well practice is essentially asking yourself, well, what went well? I know what didn't go well because that comes to mind immediately, but what did go well? And what was my role in that change? What was my part in that helped it contribute to go well? These things have been shown by the literature to improve people's outlooks and well-being. The final thing I want to tag is self-compassion. Self-compassion, it's interesting because I work with people with oodles of compassion for other people, and you may be one of those people where, what compassion is this notice that someone is suffering, being moved by the suffering, feeling a desire to care and be supportive and nurturing, offering kindness, a kind voice rather than judgment or harshness, and acknowledging that suffering is and imperfection is a part of our human experience, that we all suffer in some way. This is compassion for another. Well, what self-compassion is doing that to yourself. It's being a good friend to yourself and being able to act kind and gentle with yourself, but doing it in a way that doesn't feel phony, fluffy, or sort of like propped up. So there's three components that I want to drill into. And the first one is self-kindness. This is the one that I think most people have a challenge with is it's one thing for me to be kind and gentle with another. Well, first, let me just say, like when I tell you you should be a good friend to yourself, I don't think good friends with each other lie to each other. So I wouldn't want you to lie. I wouldn't want you got a friend who's in a hole or in a bad place and isn't doing well, is really upset. You don't want to go tell them lies because I don't think that's a nice thing to do, but you're going to be gentle and you're going to be kind and you're going to be reasonable about it. You're not going to say mean, harsh things. One of the dilemmas is when people are really upset, a lot of times they go to self-judgment, condemnation, and somehow, make it about you. So I think being mindful of, am I in one of those places? Can I be a better friend to myself? Can I speak in a way like I would to a good friend, as if I'm speaking to myself? That's the intervention. It's also important, I think, when you know this, like when you share your suffering with another, there's a connectedness and you don't feel so alone. And a lot of times when we suffer and we're upset about things, one of the challenges to self-compassion is that we get isolated. You probably know this already, but like shame can live a long time in the shadows. When it's made public and you receive kindness and support from other humans, it goes away, it dissipates. It's amazing. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that suffering happens and is a part of our experience, and being able to share your suffering with another person you feel trusting with and you care about, cares about you, is really powerful to improve self-compassion. The final thing is um, this thing called mindfulness, which you've heard a bajillion times. And it's in this setting, I'm going to be very specific with what I mean. A lot of times our feelings validate our thoughts. So I might tell you, I'm really anxious about this upcoming presentation. I'm just super anxious. And the dilemma is that whether the presentation is nerve-wracking or not, um, the feeling I have validates the thought. And so one of the challenges to having greater self-compassion is that our thoughts and our feelings get merged and fused together. You probably heard this statement like, don't always believe the things you feel, or don't always believe the things you think. And it's this idea that I'm building this inner narrative. There's a story I'm telling myself about whatever just happened. The intervention, though, if you're wanting to improve your self-compassion and have greater mindfulness, I would encourage you to do two things. One is you would say to yourself, I'm having a feeling. And then the second thing is, and the story I'm telling myself is, I'm having a feeling that I'm nervous about the coming presentation, and the story I'm telling myself is that it's going to go lousy. Now, the intervention of separating out the thought and the feeling and using the words purposely, what's the story I'm telling myself, puts the narrative in brackets to say it may or may not be true. It's different to say, I'm anxious, I'm anxious about this presentation, or this is a nerve-wracking presentation. I've merged the thought. So I would challenge you to separate out the thought and feeling by saying, I'm having a feeling, and the story I'm telling myself. That's a way to improve your self-compassion. I have a guarantee for you. This may sound both funny and maybe a little weak. I apologize. I guarantee if you try these things, whether it's gratitude practice or thought stopping or working on self-compassion, I guarantee that your life won't get worse. Okay, that may be a weak guarantee, but these things we're talking about, starting small and building over time, those kinds of things are really fundamental. There's a lot of research, a lot of truth that shows that they're helpful, they're healthful, and they're substantive. So I would challenge you to do that. I will share my slides with Brandy and whomever can distribute those, and you're happy to share those with whomever. But let me sort of stop here. And what I'd love to do is in the, you could see my email address. It's llong@kumc.edu. If you have a individual question you'd wish to ask, that's fine outside of the presentation. But of what I've said thus far today, or to this point, any other questions or any other um, statements that you'd like to make. And if you would, instead of putting them in the question thing, how about now we have people raise their hands, and if Brandy sees you, she'll call on you, and you can either ask your one question or make your one statement. So kind of going back, the request is, what's one thing of what I said that you connected with that recently? And also, what's one question that you might have? I may have jinxed it by asking you to unmic and say it out loud. That's I know that's a different experience. That's a different thing. But I first I just want to thank you for the opportunity to present and talk to you. Oh, I see Brandy, you've got your hand up. So what's your
Yeah, if I had
question?
to go ahead and start here, and apologize for any background noise, but one of the things, Larry, that really resonated with me that you talked about is this idea of pairing up your positive and your negatives, like making sure that you're thinking not just about the positives, but also the negatives and the gratitude. And I wanted to just ask for those of us with, children, right? We're raising children in this society today. There's a fun practice I do with my kids. I try to do it about once a week, which is, tell me a rose, tell me a thorn, and tell me a seed. So hope for tomorrow. Um, and, do you have any other just ideas or thoughts for this group on, as we're raising our children in this society that's very focused on work and virtual and that type of thing? Any tips for the group there?
Oh, first I love you said rose, thorn, or seed. Is that correct?
Yeah, we say a rose, which is something happy that happened this week, a thorn, which is something not great, and then a seed, which is your hope for next week.
I love that because it's authentic to you and your family, and your kids will have that as a memory, and you sort of draw and invite that discussion as if it's safe and okay to do, which is awesome. Um, I get asked a lot, like as a busy professional, as somebody who wants to be successful professionally, I don't want my kids to not be okay. And, I'm pulled in 12 different directions. It's really hard. And how can I um, make sure, what can I do to like show my kids I care about them, and make sure they grow up psychologically healthy and well and all of that. And I don't know that you're going to like my answer, but let me just tell you it. What's key is that you take care of you. Because regardless of what the intervention or action is, or even how, Brandy, how you said this, if you're not present, if you're not able to sort of put your phone away and like be like emotionally present in the moment when your kids say whatever your kids say, um, it isn't going to go. It isn't going to go well. Or if you're always busy and grumpy, and it's hard not to, I don't know, and I had when my children are all in their mid 20s or 30s, but when my twins were younger, I remember it was always such a chaos running around, and was always feels like we would accomplish different things, and that's what it was all about. But I remember there are these moments where, your kids kind of get in your pathway and you want to be at the ready. And I suppose if someone were to ask me like, well, what's one thing I can do to like really connect with my kids? I love what you do already, Brandy, but probably even more of a priority, I would say your investment in your own like personal well-being, mental health, your ability to kind of take care of yourself, be present, that's fundamental. And that's sort of in the undercurrent of anything you do as a parent. Because what it tells me is if you can do that, you're going to be more mindful, deliberate, and intentional as you engage. And I don't want anybody here to feel guilty, because I think one of the realities is that it's hard to honor all roles, all identities, and to do that as well as all we would wish to. But I think the takeaway is I hope from this presentation or for the next couple of weeks or months, you'll look for one or two things you can do that will help you with that 5 or 10% bandwidth gain, whether it's your sleep or some other thing, because that's going to allow you to have greater presence, greater mindfulness and approach as you would engage with your kids. That was a great question, Brandy.
Those are great points too, Larry.
And Dr. Long, I'd had a couple myself, and looks like we do have one question there as well. But I thought the stats were very enlightening as well, and I love some of the takeaways and really kind of actionable insights, especially kind of just starting small. So one of them for me was just documenting gratitude rather than kind of veering toward the negative or the venting component. So, but anyway, really great presentation, and thank you. There is one question I saw
Yeah.
there too, it looks like, so I'll let you hit that one.
Yeah. So thank you, Rachel. Any suggestions on how we respond to someone who exhibits toxic positivity? Um, I would encourage you not to argue with them, but I would stay the course. You stay being you, which means they're going to be uncomfortable. So like someone says, well, don't you mean it this way? Or, oh, it'll get better. And I'm not going to get into it with somebody if I'm having a hard time or I shared something heavy or hard or whatever, that it'll get better or not. I'm not going to argue, but I'm going to say, well, I don't know, maybe. I think the idea is you try to stay authentic to yourself. I don't want to insist and command that somebody is able to kind of be vulnerable or present with me. They may be anxious or uncomfortable. Maybe that's what they're telling me, is that they don't do that space very well, or we don't have trust in our relationship for whatever. But in doing so, I'm going to be inviting them to like be more, have a more authentic relationship. And I'm going to tell them that I don't, I'm not going to like play along with fluffiness. I'm not going to like meet you. And I might say, someone says, hey, how you doing? I might say, I'm fine. Or I might say, well, good and bad, I guess. That's a more vulnerable thing to say. Or I could go to greater depth with how to scale it. But I think in my and not knowing specific contexts with specific people, what I'd say is it's really important to stay the course, be you, just try not to be reactive or go after people about their inability. And I'm not saying they don't deserve it, but I don't know that it'll help you in any way. But thank you for that question, Rachel.
Yeah, looks like we'll give it just one more second, but did want to just say thank you again, Dr. Long,
Sure.
for the presentation and sharing kind of your time and insights. I thought it was great. And thank you for everybody who's had a chance to join today as well. It looks like we don't have any other questions right now, and we're pretty much at time. So why don't we land here? But thank you all again.
Sure.
Hopefully you all have a great afternoon, and we'll hope to see you at an upcoming HIMSS event as well. So take care, everybody. Thanks again.
Okay, thanks.